I received a phone call from a woman who was describing how irritating and inconsiderate her coworkers could be. Nothing big, just little, inconsiderations, little moments of thoughtlessness, but it was really bugging her. And we've talked about her coworkers more than once. So she said, I suppose there will always be things that will inconvenience us. There always will. She's right. So she said, so what is the whole point I'm supposed to learn here? Is it to just let it go? To let go of the anger? What's the key? No, it's not about letting it go. That's a never-ending effort. It almost implies that we've already sunk our teeth into it. And so letting go becomes effortful, and then there's all that gunk between your teeth. It's a lot of work. It's about being grateful. Gratitude. When I'm grateful, the little stuff that happens just doesn't bother me. Like, grateful about what? For example, like at work. Well, let's see. I'm alive. I have people who love me. I have functioning limbs. I get to go to work. I get to earn a living. There are a great number of people who wish that they had a job at all. God loves me. I know principles that enable me to learn and grow so that I'm constantly finding a more solid and deeper happiness. And I'm going to suggest that gratitude is not a state of mind. Gratitude is a state of heart. It's a condition of unassailable fullness and power. Once we're truly grateful, there's no effort involved in letting things go. They don't bother us in the first place. They really don't matter. I can't count how many people finally understand this and call me and say, I spent all day long grateful. A woman just the other day said she spent all day grateful that her boss gave her a job in the first place and that he was constantly training her so that she could become more valuable, be paid more, either by him or by the next employer. She said her boss used to bother her all day long, but because she chose to be grateful before she went to work, he didn't bother her a bit. It's really about gratitude. I know a woman who lives in shame. She said that she realized that her shame is because when she was just 3 years old, her father killed himself. And so she was ashamed that he had abandoned her. She pronounced this, of course, with some degree of gravity and was proud of her realization. Not really. We really like to pin our fears or our shame or whatever on some big event or series of events, death of a family member, sexual abuse, divorce, that kind of thing. But those are just distractions. They're dramatic things that we can point to and things that tend to make people go, oh, I'm so sorry. I lost my father when I was 3. Oh, I'm so sorry. They say, it may have been a part of a pattern, a lifetime pattern, but the event by itself, no, does not cause our shame. It's back to the original wound that we've talked about many times on video chats, in books, and so on. The original wound is that we were not loved. That's all it takes. It doesn't have to be something done to us, simply a lack of what we needed done for us. So if we were not loved, pretty much the only conclusion that we could make, and this is an unspoken conclusion, in most cases unrealized conclusion, is because we were not worth being loved, and hence the shame. The big events were just part of that wound. So what's the solution? I've met people who've been in years of therapy talking about their sexual abuse. I knew one lady who'd been in therapy for 20 years, and she considered it an enormous success when, through talking or hypnosis or whatever, she could recall one more event of sexual abuse. So what? It never made her happy. No, what we need is healing. We need to tell the truth about our choices, not just what was done to us. We need to find a wise person capable of loving us. And then trust it, as we've talked about how many times here. Find the love, trust the love, which will then begin to heal us. Remember it, share it. Then we're bathed in it. And our wounds really cannot persist in an atmosphere of love. They just can't do it. I'm going to talk about Lucy and Frank, husband and wife. And it's a distillation of several communications because they just really went on far too long. Lucy said, my husband has a habit of not responding. I don't mean far too long as in intolerant of their discussing it. I mean too long for this video chat. She said, my husband has a habit of not responding when I speak to him. I say something and he says nothing. So I repeat it. And often he says nothing the second time. The third time I say it, he snaps at me and says something like, I heard you the first time. And then often he still doesn't respond to me. I've tried lots of things, but I've decided just to let it go. But somehow that doesn't really sit right with me either. This is not a small matter. His not responding is a huge sign of his inability to love you. Notice I don't say his refusal to love you, his inability to love you. Perhaps the first and most essential step in loving someone is listening to them with full attention, with real understanding, genuine listening. And there's tons written about this in Real Love material, a whole lot in Real Love and Marriage, and lots on video chats and blogs. You can't feel loved by somebody who doesn't listen to you. You just can't do it. So this can't continue. So you're right. It just doesn't feel quite right. Lucy continues. I'm trying to remember what I called her husband. Frank. Lucy says, do you know why he doesn't respond? Because I've asked him before why he doesn't respond, and he says he doesn't know. I actually have a pretty good idea why he doesn't respond. Responding to you in the past has often ended up in unpleasant exchanges. You have a tendency to ask questions that are more accusations than questions, and not always. But see, even if you did this 1 in 10 times, he'd be really reluctant to stick his head in a trap. And my guess is that this has happened many other times in his life. When he does respond, when he does engage in conversation with you, you tend to grill him with more questions or criticize him. So what's he learned to do? Not respond. So the why isn't all that difficult. You continue. Come to think of it, his sister said that he's always been like this, not responding to people when they speak. So now you tell me. So this pattern of withdrawing from painful interactions predates you by a lot. No surprise here. We learned to be who we are from an early age, very early, and we tend to stay that way till we're dead. Usually we just repeat age 4 forever. So you ask, what can be done? You said this can't continue. What matters now is that he's willing to commit. Now, this would be only if he's willing to, but this has got to change. Your marriage is suffering for this. Is that he's willing to commit to always respond. Now, this is going to scare him, but here's a solution. I mean, if I were talking to him, I'm not, but you can read this to him. He's got to always respond. Listening is part of loving, and it's part of being in a partnership. You can't be in a partnership in business where you don't respond to emails from your business partner. It's just inconceivable. So he commits to respond, even if it's just to say, give me a minute. That's all. But he's got to respond. Then, if you turn his response into an unpleasant exchange, as has happened in the past, he needs to tell you that you did that so that you can see it and learn to stop it. So read him my email responses to you so that he understands where we're going with all this. It's like an entire approach to listening that will lead to much greater happiness. Lucy responds, I believe in a later email. I see what you're saying, and I agree that my responses and my grilling him and criticizing him have caused all of this, and that I have done all these unloving things. So we did read your email reply, and he said that he never knew that not responding was unloving. That seems almost beyond belief, doesn't it? Your partner speaks, you don't respond, and you didn't know that was unloving. But I believe him. He really didn't know. He was just protecting himself, which underlines what people are always doing when they protect themselves. They're thinking of themselves. They don't think of how it might be unloving to you. So to him, it was just protective, not unloving. He didn't realize that he was protecting himself all this time. You continue. He has agreed to reply to me every time. Well, I think that's just downright sweet. No kidding. It's all a response to pain. And his willingness to do this differently is miraculous. Please tell him that. He'll do his best and he will make mistakes. Oh, this is Lucy speaking. He'll do his best and he'll make mistakes. How do I lovingly handle those times that he makes a mistake? Hang on a sec. My sweetie had no pen. And then, of course, I threw it so it fell on the floor. So what do you do when he makes mistakes and he doesn't respond? You gently take his face in your hands and you tell him that you'll be back in a minute to restate what you said to him and what he didn't respond to. No irritation. You're just helping him see what he presently really does not see. So there's no sense being irritated at him. You say, do I let one go, one of these times when he doesn't respond, or maybe two before I gently remind him of our agreement, or ask him if he heard me, or ask for a response? No, only once. Only one time do you allow him not to respond to you. Because there has to be consistency. He's not going to learn this if you only point it out once in a while. If you point it out every fifth time that he doesn't respond, he's going to assume that the other 4 times he was responding and that he's improving. To everybody who's listening, obstacles to communication in a relationship cannot continue. You have to work it out. Make it happen. If you need the help of a wise person or a coach, do that. But poor listening and poor communicating, it'll kill you. Keep in mind that I'm not advocating listening or communication techniques. It all has to be done with an underpinning or a foundation of loving, or it's just not going to work. Let's see. This is a partial conversation that I got from somebody, so I may make some mistakes in it. Whoever I'm quoting can shoot me. Liz Friedman, who's one of the members of the website, was talking to somebody who was feeling bad about making a mistake, and she said, Dr. Liz Friedman, give you the diagnosis of being human, and there is no cure for this one. I thought that was hysterical and true. We're all human. There's no cure for it. We have to make mistakes. We spend our whole lives trying to avoid making mistakes. I suggest that's really kind of a wasted effort. Now, we want to be mindful of our mistakes, but we have to make them. So now, do you want to cry about it, feel guilty about it, lash out at others because of it, spend your whole life worrying and fretting so you don't make mistakes? Or just not do all the worrying and occasionally just make them and learn from them? Far easier. And there have been a number of studies that show that we actually learn faster from making them than from being afraid and not taking risks, and then we learn nothing. Here's a story about Zoe, who is now, like, I think 19 months old. The little stinkers, they keep changing their ages, so I can't keep track of it all. But at the time that this story comes from, she was 14 months old. Her mother says, last Wednesday we were at the library when, for the first time in her relatively short and inexperienced life, Zoe met an older girl who was pointedly unkind to her. So, no experience. 14 months old, never had an older kid just go out of their way to be mean. Zoe had been fortunate enough to avoid any similar experiences until that point. Some kids drop sand on her head in the playground or give her nasty looks, but for the most part, they tend to move on after a couple of seconds. This was the first time that anybody had intentionally been mean to her for more than a second or two. It was an interesting thing to witness. Her mother continues. This girl repeatedly yelled in Zoe's face and hit her softly, not enough to cause brain damage, on the head with a bag that she was holding. Despite her obvious distaste for how she was being treated, Zoe did not cry. Now, this is really interesting information about a kid who's been loved from birth, because they behave differently from children who are afraid. Zoe behaves differently. Sylvie does. The others of my grandkids do. That's why these are fascinating stories. This isn't about bragging about the kid. This is for the rest of us to learn what life can be like unafraid. So she didn't cry. With the benefit of being loved and listened to by so many people in her life, she was emotionally prepared, so that this one incident did not push her over the edge in any way. Good lesson for adults. If you've ever spent any substantial time with toddlers, you know how remarkable and unusual it is that this didn't push Zoe's buttons. Zoe simply backed up to me and asked me if I would hold her. So I did. Also, for the first time in her life, I saw Zoe become wary. Even though I was holding her, she followed the other girl around the room like a hawk with her eyes. She stopped dancing, stopped listening to the music, and entirely lost her ability to enjoy herself. Even after the girl left the library, Zoe refused to budge for a good 10 minutes to be sure that the girl was gone, like a predator. She was just a quiet lump in my lap. That was Zoe's reaction the first time she'd ever been the target of anybody's focused anger. And it was with a 6-year-old who was a complete stranger, who played a part in her life for like 10 minutes. Now, think about how a person might react after 50 years as the brunt of someone else's unhappiness. If that doesn't scare you, think about how one might react after 50 years of anger from both parents, spouses, co-workers, bosses, friends, and strangers. Is it still surprising that strangers on the streets of New York yell at each other over where to walk on the sidewalk? You don't even have to guess how people turn out. Every time this little girl hit Zoe, her grandfather reacted, the older girl's grandfather, by yelling at her sharply, yanking her back by the coat, hitting her, and then apologizing profusely to me. Between the two of them, there was so much misery and confusion that I don't know who to feel more sorry for. It's cyclical. It keeps going on. We don't outgrow this sensitivity to harshness. It compounds. That's why these stories are so lovely. We see the effect of Zoe, who really has very little experience with being treated badly. And when she didn't go crazy over it and cry. She just backed up and went, whoa, and kept her eyes out for this kid. But now imagine, so that was just a little bit of kind of like semi-PTSD. I know the true definition of PTSD isn't met, but imagine somebody being traumatized from childhood through age 50, 60. Debilitating. Here's somebody who says, my husband Jack was ranting about how we had a flat tire in my car and how I had no jack. Oh, it's interesting. I didn't notice that. My husband Jack and she had no jacks. Well, anyway, you get the pun. And how could somebody possibly own a car and not know where their jack is? Blah, 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 blah. So I kindly let him go on, but it didn't work for long. I wanted him to stop attacking me, so I finally bit back. Yeah, I know, not productive toward a goal of having a loving relationship. And I'm chuckling about it. I mean, this is so common. We just simply don't know better solutions than the ones that we pick. So you continue. Here's my question. I've heard you talk about how when there is a problem or a conflict, we need to speak sooner and clearer. So you have been listening. I didn't know what to say quicker or clearly. So what words do I use in that moment? Bless you for asking. We wait far too long before we speak. We think, well, I can put up with this for a little bit. I'll just let it go. Yeah, maybe for a minute. But we don't really let it go. Like the lady I was talking about earlier who said, it's the secret just to let it go at work. No, because we store it up. It becomes a wound that festers. And then it happens again. And again, we let it go. Sort of. By the time we get to 4 times and then we can't take it, then we blow up like you did. And then everybody's screwed. You, him, the kids in the car, everything. Sooner, clearer. So you could say, this is just an example, I'm not going to tell you what words to say. Sweetie, you say to him, as soon as he starts, the instant he starts on about the jack, you say, I screwed up. I know I screwed up. I was stupid. I understand that completely. If you want to keep telling me I'm stupid, you can, but I've got the point. What would you like to do? With no anger. I promise you, he'll stop ranting. Because it's kind of embarrassing after that. Because usually when people are ranting, they don't realize that they're repeating themselves over and over again and looking really stupid. So look at what you've done. He's ranting about you, which is never the cause of his anger, but he doesn't know that, so on he rants. By speaking sooner and clearer, you have changed the subject of the conversation. You have kindly forced him to consider his behavior. No accusation in the words that I just suggested. You don't stop him. You just turn the focus back on him by saying, I got that I'm stupid. So you got the you part. You got that. I got that I'm stupid. Now what would you like to do? See how you've changed the subject from you to him? It's not just a trick. It's a way of involving both of you in a partnership. I've been seeing stuff in the newspapers lately about, and I read, I say lately, I stack up newspapers and then I'll read, 8 or 10 at a time. And sometimes I say something, Don, about something newsworthy, and it turns out that happened 3 years ago. But recently there have been riots in Baltimore. I saw pictures of buildings burning. And I don't know all the details, so don't send me an email correcting the details because I don't know them. But these things and the riots in Ferguson, Missouri, I think, they tend to go like this. They've been going on forever. Detroit, Cincinnati, somebody gets shot. People scream either race or police or whatever, and then they riot. This is so typical, actually, of daily interactions between any two people or groups of people everywhere. A black man, for example, is confronted by a policeman. He's told to freeze and show his hands. He becomes afraid, or he gets angry. He refuses to show his hands. He reaches into his pocket. He resists the police. The policeman becomes afraid and is angry. So he reacts, possibly overreacts. So what do? We talk about the effects of fear that are everywhere and poisoning interactions on the street, at home, at work. Do we talk about that? No. Do we address the real problem? No. The problem is no love. We make it about race or police or whatever instead of talking about the real cause. That's not the problem. So the conflicts continue. It's tragic, to be sure, when people get killed in such circumstances, but the lack of resolution is almost boring if it were not so horrifying. We're not paying attention to the cause. We all remember Columbine. Some kids were shot. We didn't make it about race because there wasn't a black person involved. If a black person's involved, it's race. If it's white, well then dang, we got to find another lie to focus on. So, it's guns. or it's the teachers, or it's the schools. We look everywhere except at home. So after Columbine, I wrote all 159 county school systems in Georgia. I offered free seminars to the parents, teachers, and kids on the real cause of Columbine and how to prevent it in their schools. Let's get to the real cause, as opposed to putting up metal detectors. How many responses do you think I got out of 159 letters? 0. And this is typical of the entire country. We are being very, very stupid. We're blind to ourselves. And we're blind that we're blind. And that is a real problem. Until we see the real problem and start to address it, this is just going to happen in some form or other forever. Till we all, I guess, kill each other. Here's a man who'd been unhappy for 50 years. He'd found reasons to be unhappy everywhere. And then he found real love and became an unbelievably happy guy. Radiates wherever he goes. He has for quite some time. And he wrote this. He said, "Today, I worked with a man that in the past I had always found to be irritating, obsessive about details, boring, annoying, hated working with him. But not today. We did a really, really boring job involving sorting out some paperwork, but today was amazing. I had such a fun time today doing a very boring job with a previously annoying man, and strangely, I loved it. Crazy, isn't it? I mean, if we're happy, nothing is tedious or annoying, really. We've been talking about this theme 3 or 4 times now in this one video chat. He continues, this guy I was working with can really be pompous and ridiculous, but now I just want to give him a hug, which probably wouldn't work in an office environment. I didn't because I think he might have felt a bit overwhelmed, not to mention that his staff was there, but I wanted him to feel happy and at ease. It was just so great. And by some separate miracle, we found solutions to every single problem immediately. Probably not a separate miracle. When we're being loving, we think better. We do everything better. Solutions just happen. Most of us could never know that. I've said that to people before. If you feel loving, your office will run better. They look at me skeptically, at which point I realize they've screwed themselves to the wall. The only reason you're skeptical is because you've never been loving at work. It's the only way you could not know that. Most of us could never know this because when problems arise, we're so consumed by fear that we're blind. I think everybody recognizes that fear makes us blind. Well, fear is unloving. So if people felt loved and lost their fear, how could it not be the case that we would work better, more effectively? He continues, when he didn't have a piece of paper he was supposed to have, I just couldn't care less whose fault it was. I realize now how much easier my whole life would have been and could always be from now on if I never cared whose fault anything was, including my own. And I just went for the best solution every time. Anyway, he must have felt that I wasn't even secretly blaming him because he admitted some things that were his fault, which he has never done in all the years we've worked together. And I just said, thank you. But it really didn't matter, as all we needed to do is make it right. The magic of loving. And this is 2 guys at work. There's no hugging and kissing here. They're just caring about each other. It changes everything, everywhere. Makes interactions easier, more effective, enables us to shed our blindness and solve problems. Like at work, like race, like everything. Not kidding. So here's a lady that writes and says, who's dating on the internet and exchanging emails with guys. So when a guy says that he has a high libido and emphasizes that sex is important to him right off within the first 2 emails, so what that really means is that this is his form of pain relief, right? Or do some guys really have a high libido? Everybody has differing needs for everything. So sure, it's certain that some men will naturally have a greater interest in sex, but until somebody is free of pain and fear and emptiness, how could you ever know what the difference was between a basic desire, I would stop short of saying need, or pain relief? If somebody hasn't had enough real love, they're in pain and they will use sex as a form of pain relief. Or in some cases, they'll avoid sex if they're in pain. More often women, but not always, to avoid the emotional risks of sex. I've seen this general pattern. Men approach me, usually men, but sometimes women, with a consuming interest in sex, complaining that their partner isn't sufficiently available. So they find a wise person to love them. They really do it. They trust it, they feel it, they remember it. And then they come back to me and say, I enjoy sex even more than I ever did, but my need for sex has decreased. The compulsion for it decreases. The need to eliminate pain, proving that it was a pain relief all those years. So that's the general pattern that I've seen. Couldn't speak for any particular guy that's writing you for the potential of dating, but I can say that if he's bringing this up on the second email, that probably don't want to answer his emails. Here's a woman unhappy that her husband wasn't doing things the way she wanted. He would show some affection and help her with the kids some. She says, but he really just doesn't help all that much, and I'm not really feeling cared for. She says, I understand that he's not responsible for my happiness, but then she argued that as her partner, it would be a different thing for him to care about her happiness. She said, speaking like a lawyer, so responsibility for happiness and caring for my happiness are different. Yes, a clever distinction. But then she said, he should care about my happiness. Poof, now we have a problem. As soon as you say should, it's an expectation that he should be responsible for your happiness. So you can parse words, you can analyze, you can phrase things to make you sound justified, but as soon as you expect somebody to be responsible for your happiness, you're screwed. Let me illustrate. I do not feel responsible for your happiness. None of you who are listening, as it should be, because you're responsible for your own perspectives, feelings, and behaviors. There is an exception. I'm responsible for the happiness of any young children that I have. They really don't have a choice. I'm the parent and I can determine their feelings and I am responsible for them. But now back to adults. I am not responsible for your happiness, but I do care about your happiness. So the woman writing was right. There is a distinction. But even though I care about your happiness, that is a choice. This is the important thing to take away from this. That is a choice only I can make. Not a responsibility that you can tell me I should make. So I care about you. Great. That's my choice. I can take that upon myself as a responsibility. You can't give it to me. Now you can either accept the love I offer or not, but you don't get to tell me I should. I can tell myself I should, but you don't have that right. Only I do. So what can this woman do whose husband isn't being sufficiently loving? Well, she could do nothing. She could just buck up. But no, there's more she can do. She can tell him what she would like. She can make a genuinely loving request without expectations. She can be more loving herself toward him. And it's very likely that he'll respond to one or both. Here's a guy who's been doing some online dating. That's two. He said, I was talking to my date about politics, religion, and I shared my views on Muslims who came to Garland, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas, to kill people who drew cartoons of Muhammad. They were shot by the police. She asked me if I believed that Christians who killed Muslims were terrorists. I said, no. As she asked other questions, I realized I'm prejudiced. I'm afraid of Muslims as a group, though not any individual Muslims that I know. Understandable. Your prejudice is not entirely without basis. We tend to profile people on the basis of past behaviors. You continue. Then I thought of other groups that I prejudge for various reasons. Blacks regarding recent violence, the welfare state, fundamentalist Christians, churches. Finally, I think I mistrust almost all groups of people. I feel like I need to protect myself from them. Am I looking to groups for acceptance and love? The message I get from them is, you are different, so I don't feel loved. Pretty smart observation, actually, because people tend to form isolationist groups based on how they're similar, what's the rest of that, and how they're different from you, us and them. And as soon as we do us and them, pretty hard to feel loved in that environment. And on the whole, groups of people don't tend to love well. The example that leaps to mind would be mobs. So what can we do? We can learn to judge people individually. Your question then is, the next thing you say is, how do I get rid of prejudice? Just judge individuals and groups separately. As a group, it's actually all right to make loving and practical judgments about a group. For example, if I was in Paris, I would not go into a section of Paris where Muslims live, where they live Sharia law, and the Paris police have openly declared they won't go because it's too dangerous. So do I prejudge that group that I wouldn't want to go into that part of Paris? Yeah, that's called practical prejudgment. There are lots of places I wouldn't go where group mentalities prevail. I wouldn't go into a place where there were political insurgent groups in Central America, which are Christian and have killed a great number of people. I wouldn't go on a self-guided tour through cocaine fields in Colombia. That's prejudging a group. There are tribal areas in Africa that you'd have to be a moron to go in because the tribes are warring and they kill, well, whoever they can put in the sights of their gun and more. It goes on and on. I mean, years ago, I wouldn't have taken a walk down the streets of Beirut where I could be killed by a Muslim or a Christian. Turns out they all carried guns. So is it okay to prejudge a group? Yeah, just like it's okay to prejudge a highway. I won't go out and practice dribbling a basketball during rush hour on a highway in Dallas because I'll be dead. Whereas on a rural highway, which would probably be dirt, in the cornfields of Iowa, I would. That's a prejudgment that will save my life. In Georgia, where I live, there are Christian hill people up in the Think Deliverance. I wouldn't go up into the hill country, far from the road, on somebody's private property, holding the hand of my black friend and kiss him on the neck. I'd be like begging to be killed. So yeah, wise judgment separates us from animals. Prejudice, I'm going to be so misquoted, is okay. But it depends on what your judgment is for and how you feel. So I would prejudge where I went in Africa or South America or Central America. The bad part of prejudice is the fear and the anger that go with them. There are parts of my own hometown I wouldn't walk in at 2 in the morning, but I'm not afraid, nor angry, nor would I prejudge an individual who lived in that part of town. Just separate people in groups. Fred writes, the other day I was in the local rural post office and in came a man that I knew superficially. I immediately said, hello, Jim, how are you doing? As he was walking by, I could tell that he wasn't doing well. He just looked distressed and not himself. And he said, okay. But then that was immediately followed by, I'm really not okay. Now, to those of you who are listening, why did Jim change his answer from okay to not okay? A subject that we talked about just a couple of people ago. He could sense some genuine concern from Fred. Fred probably looked at him right in the eye and stayed with eye contact even after Jim said okay. That made all the difference. I promise you, if Fred hadn't shown some interest in the man, some genuine listening, his answer would have stayed okay. So Fred continues. As he was gathering his mail, I asked Jim if we could chat. He said, no, which you'd kind of expect. Then as he was leaving, I asked again. Whoa, this is crazy cool listening. I said, can I call you when we both get back to our homes? He said, yes, please do. As soon as I got home, I called him up and I asked if I could drive over and see him. And he said, yeah, I'd like that. This is freakishly trusting and willing to take risks. This is trust. We've talked about this now in every video chat for quite some time because people ask all the time, what does trust look like? Like this. Trusting that love is powerful. Trusting that love is better than not caring. He did that. Fred says, I immediately drove over, knocked on his door. He invited me in, and without another word, simply, he walked away from the door where I was standing. He bowed his head with his hands on each side of his face and began weeping. No words. I was a bit confused, but from the look at the post office and now this, I knew something was terribly wrong. Yeah. And he felt safe enough to express it because you listened. Fred says, I didn't know what to do, but the only thing that came to my mind was to walk over and hug him. So there we were, two grown men standing in the entryway with me hugging him, and I wouldn't let go. And the more I held him, the more he wept. And in fact, the weeping escalated to uncontrollable sobbing. It was the only way I knew how to love him in his pain. Thank goodness nobody looked in the windows because I'm sure it would look pretty weird, but I didn't care. And I didn't care what he thought. It was the only lifeline I had in my arsenal to throw out to this poor guy who was in such obvious pain. We stood there embracing for several minutes. Picture this. Two old guys, one of whom just said, is there anything I can do for you? But he meant it. Fred says he excused himself to get a drink where he broke down again, and again I held him for several minutes. He finally settled down and invited me to sit with him on the couch. It was like I'd participated in a miracle, and all I did was tell him with a hug that he was not alone. No, it's not like a miracle. This is a miracle. Trust. You and him, both of you. You trusted the power of loving him, and he trusted you. He felt your confidence. You continue. He began to explain to me through buckets of tears how he'd compromised his marriage and trust with his wife. We spent more time talking about some of the principles of real love and how he was empty, alone, and afraid, and that it didn't have to be like this. I could go on for a whole chapter. I have experienced the power of real love in my life, says Fred, and how important it is to just feel loved when you need it the most. I confess that in all my adult lifetime, I've never held a man or a woman like this, mostly because I was afraid of what somebody would think of me. Thank you for holding me and helping me to be more vulnerable and loving. This is trusting. My pleasure. And when we feel loved ourselves, we don't need to express gratitude to the person who loves us, although feeling just grateful for it certainly makes us happier. Just pass it on. Here's somebody who says, yesterday I was unexpectedly texted and asked out for a drink by a hot chick, and I temporarily lost my sanity. I didn't go out with her, but I ended up talking with her on the phone for a bit last night, and the conversation led to her wanting to be friends with benefits. very tempting stuff, sex. The whole experience. Somebody was attracted to you. You were wanted. The games of flattery, control, the physical sensations. Sheesh, what a bonanza. You continue. During this interaction, a full range of imitation love was going on, and it was like I was on drugs just by talking to her. Yeah, it's a great feeling. You said, I wanted to go around and see her and have sex with her, but thankfully, nothing had been confirmed about meeting up. Although this was going on, I was feeling a bit torn, as I knew that this was dangerous and it would be damaging and unloving for both parties, but I was just curious as to how I would feel about it. Yeah, it's like curiosity about any other kind of addiction. I felt like whatever happened here, I would learn something. I've heard this before. It actually sounds rational. Well, whatever happens, I will learn something. Let's see. I'll go out on a mountain road 100 miles long with no gas stations and no people. I just won't take a spare tire with me, and whatever happens, I will learn something. I will climb Mount Everest without a coat, and whatever happens, I will learn something. Hysterical. I'll get drunk and drive my car fast around a curve, and whatever happens, I'll learn something. No, you'll be dead or crippled. You choose what happens, not just whatever happens. And if you anticipate using, like using a drug, like a person or an actual drug, and then learning, it becomes a deadly game. I'll just go ahead and indulge in my addiction, but I'll learn from it. I have seen addicts use this reasoning until, literally, they're dead. You continue. This morning when I woke up, my head was in the clouds a bit still from the conversation. I think that's just where the fantasy and the running takes me. I came back to the 5 truths, came back to earth, and I've got my feet back on the ground. Well, good for you. Nice recovery. I've woken up and really come to my senses. I was able to replay the interaction in my head. I was aware of the high that I was getting in the anticipation of possibly having sex. In the past, I wouldn't have noticed it and would have acted on my impulses, but I didn't this time because I thought about it. Psh, bless your heart. We've all had experiences like this where we've not thought about it and jumped into our addictions. And some of us have had the experience where we have thought about it. So good for you. You say, I also realized that she was going into a bit of fantasy, and so did I. I suppose it might have felt good before real love, and it would have anesthetized my pain. We all know the story about how addictions go. So bless your heart for figuring it out, for thinking about the consequences of using before you use. Because, yeah, sure, if you use, you'll learn something, but it gets harder and harder to learn. The more you use, the more it takes from you, robs you of your freedom to choose. And then eventually, you can't make any choices at all. Fear makes your choices. Addictions make your choices. And you become really powerless. And then when you're miserable and alone, you wonder what happened. And it happened, one choice at a time. A woman called. She said that she began the day with a whiny, complaining attitude, just hated everything. Then she listened to an archived video chat during lunch, and she said that I said something that made it feel like I reached out through the computer monitor and held her. She said it changed her entire perspective. She saw that she was being ungrateful, selfish, and foolish. When she returned from lunch, one of her coworkers even asked, "What happened to you?" She was visibly different. Now, be clear, all of those of you who are listening, I didn't make the difference. This is just a testament to the power of surrounding ourselves with true principles. Just immersing ourselves in the truth changes the lies that are causing our victimhood and pain. Event, judgment, feeling, and reaction. We change our judgments, which takes trust. And then all the rest changes. The truth matters. She chose to listen to the truth. It changed her judgments. It changed her feelings. It changed the way she responded to people. And we need to refresh our minds and hearts with the truth as often as we can. We need to be immersed in it. Here's somebody who says, I have a cousin who just got married. Her husband is a complete jerk. Drinks too much, controls her, uses her, doesn't know the first thing about love. But everywhere she goes, my cousin, who's recently married, she talks about how great her life is, how wonderful he is. She just goes on and on in this fakey voice and fakey smile. I cannot be happy for them. That's kind of obvious. We could take her to the village square and just stone her. I can't be happy for them. I just can't. I know it's none of my business, but I just can't let it go. Why does this bother me? What can I do? So let's do the first question first. Actually, the second question first. What can you do? You said it perfectly. It's none of my business. That is what you can do. It's none of your business to even be thinking about what she's doing, unless you're employed as her, personal guidance counselor, which is, seems highly doubtful. You said, I know it's none of my business, but wrong. After it's none of my business, there's no but. You're done. Now, the other question. Why does this bother you? Well, that's not so complicated. Usually a couple reasons, at least. We'll do just two. You want to live, and this is important for a lot of us because we wonder why we're jealous of people, frightened by people, annoyed by people, can't be happy by people who have nothing to do with us. You want to live in an orderly, predictable world that won't hurt you. Well, who doesn't? A world without lies, without manipulation, without pain. Your cousin is a liar and a manipulator. This doesn't fit in your safe world. It's personally disturbing. Okay, I get it. But again, that part of the universe, her life is none of your business. Your job is to take care of the lying and manipulating and hurting in your life. That is how you can have a safe and happy world. Now, 2, it's very likely that she claims a level of happiness that you yourself don't quite have. Actually, that's really very obvious if you hate her for pretending to be happy. And it bothers you that you don't have it. So what do you do with that? You do whatever it takes for you to live genuinely happy and leave your cousin alone. Here's somebody that says, as I was listening to Frank's, I didn't change the name, Frank's conference call yesterday, I heard somebody sharing about her annoyance with a person who repeats herself or repeats himself. I remembered my mother and how I could feel irritated when she did that. And then I remembered an old lady who used to tell me the same story of her meeting her soon-to-be husband, and she would tell it over and over every time I'd see her, and I loved listening to her. I never got annoyed by that. I wondered what was the difference, and I came up with the idea that maybe it's because I loved the old lady and she loved me. Yeah, duh, you're right. That's the difference. If you know I love you, you don't care how often I tell the same story. I've told some of the same stories, I'm sure, 20 times to my children, and they don't care because they know that I love them. In fact, one day I was telling a story to my daughter about some guy who had done something, and she finally, I guess, couldn't stand anymore. She said, "Yes, Dad, I know that's my brother." So apparently I've told some of the same stories more than once and not remembered. If you know I love you, you don't care. If you don't know I love you, then my repetition feels like a hammer, just pounding you over and over. You continue. I thought about how annoyed I feel when my ex-husband asks me for something or says something. The reason I feel that way, the reason that I get annoyed is because he doesn't love me. This insight came to me after 2 years of being divorced, still living together as roommates in the same house. See, that might do it. I believed if I just try harder to be loving and make clear agreements, it could work. Now I know why it cannot and will not. I feel free now, just another layer peeled off, and I'm relieved. Very cool for you, honey. The truth really does make us free. Here's somebody who says, I seem to collect interesting people. They flock to me. They tell me stories. They're entertaining, and when I'm with them, I feel like I'm part of the in-group. Then when I'm by myself or with family members, I feel like nothing. I married a guy who was a salesman. Endless stories. Funny. It was great for a few months, and then it failed. So apparently, my dear, you're a great audience. You listen to people who are entertainers, and they love it, and then they love you. So it's a trade. You give them praise and attention, and they give you a sense of acceptance and a role in their lives. When the trading is fresh, it's great. Seems like happiness. That's why you married the guy who told stories. But then the imitation thrill wore off, as always, and you were left with nothing. She wrote later in a second email to me, and she said, that's it. She said, I've never understood this until now. So what can I do about it? Avoid entertaining people for now, meaning avoid their company. They're a drug for you, just like you'd avoid cocaine. Find unconditionally loving people, boring people. Books will tell you how to do that. And talk about yourself. Talk about your fears, your flaws, your mistakes, whatever. And let other people listen to you and love you instead of entertaining you. And you'll lose your need for the kind of trading that you do. The pattern is the same, even though we've gone through a bunch of emails and stories. Unhappiness is everywhere in the world. And the solution just isn't that tricky. We need to find people who can love us, trust them, remember that they love us when things are difficult and they're not around us. And then eventually we learn to share it. And then we're immersed in unconditional love everywhere we go. And it's guaranteed that we'll be happy. I look forward to seeing you in a week. Thanks.